The Carboni family is one of the most powerful mafia syndicates on the Pacific Northwest coast. Unlike underworld families that control drugs or weapons, the Carboni empire was built on the ocean. They monopolize marine resources, control shipping lanes, hold the rights to large-scale fishing, and dominate the entire seafood supply chain from the Olympic Peninsula down to the major ports along the west coast. The sea gives the family everything: money, status, power, and a mystical force that only Carboni blood can touch. Enzo Carboni, the current boss, 36 years old, inherited this empire after the sudden death of the father he idolized. His father, a man who believed the sea was a living entity rather than just a resource, taught Enzo from a young age. The sea gives us everything, but if we betray it, the sea will take back 100-fold. That lesson was carved into Enzo's bones, shaping the way he ruled. Ruthless to his enemies, but deeply reverent to the ocean. 10 years ago, after his father's death, Enzo discovered he possessed a strange ability: a connection with the deity of the sea, a supernatural entity ruling the waters of the Olympic Peninsula. Whenever Enzo focuses his energy and touches the water, the deity appears, bringing prophecies about the ocean's future. An enemy's plot, an approaching storm, or an opportunity only a visionary could seize. This power made Enzo nearly invincible in the underworld. But the price was brutal. With every use, his energy was drained, and his body temperature dropped. Enzo's body is always colder than a normal person's, cold from his fingertips to his gaze, and he knows that if he abuses this power, it will kill him. It is this obsession with his curse that makes Enzo isolate himself. He avoids long-term attachments, terrified that the ice within him will spread to those he loves, convinced that fate has drawn an impassable line between him and a normal, happy life. But the sea, the very entity that gave him power, also brought an unpredictable variable into his life: Liora Vance. The 34-year-old kelp diver, known among local fishermen as the daughter of the sea, saved Enzo from an underwater accident. More than that, she revealed a secret about an anomaly in the ocean that the Carboni Empire was entirely unaware of. A silent threat killing the marine ecosystem, one that was likely aimed directly at the foundation of his family's power. That very secret violently pulled their lives together in a way neither could have foreseen. And from the bottom of the ocean, a story of love, power, and sacrifice begins to surface. Morning on the Olympic Peninsula began like any other day in Liora Vance's past 12 years. She woke up early, slipped into her black form-fitting wetsuit, highlighting the toned, athletic physique of a veteran diver, and stepped out onto the porch to breathe in the crisp morning air. The cold, salty wind carried the scent of pine and fresh kelp. The ocean's surface rippled with silver under the dawn light. Liora smiled. A smile of pure, unadulterated contentment from someone who loved her job down to her bones. She walked into the kitchen to grab a bottle of water. Her father, Arthur Vance, was already sitting at the table, a mug of black coffee in front of him, the local newspaper half open. He looked at her in her tight wetsuit, saying nothing, just watching, then lowered his voice. "The waves are rough today." It wasn't a question. It was a warning. It meant don't go. "I know, Dad." Liora poured her water, drank it standing up, and set the bottle down. She didn't look at him because if she did, she would see the crease between his brows deeper than usual, and she would see the way he gripped his coffee mug with both hands, the grip of a man holding himself back from saying more. 14 years since her mother passed away, every morning Liora went to the sea was a silent war between father and daughter. He forbade it with his eyes, she defied it with her footsteps. She walked past him, lightly touching his shoulder, a quick, brief touch that they both pretended didn't happen but desperately needed, and walked out the door. Her hand absent-mindedly brushed against the white mother-of-pearl pendant resting against her collarbone. It was a keepsake her mother had made the night she was born. For 20 years, it had never left her neck. She rode her motorcycle out to her usual spot, where she harvested kelp every day. The moment she dove into the water, the world completely transformed. Above the surface, it was the orange-gold light of dawn scattering over gentle waves, but beneath the ocean was another universe. Bull kelp forests swayed tall like dancers, the light piercing through their canopies creating a magical stained glass effect. Orange-striped rockfish glided through rock crevices, sea otters floated on their backs clutching sea urchins, and moon jellyfish drifted transparently like swimming dreams. Liora cut the kelp gently, precisely, taking only the mature fronds so the young roots could continue to live. But as she swam deeper toward the offshore reef, she noticed an anomaly. A patch of the reef was stained a sickly, dull brown. The kelp was withered and yellow, the coral bleached white, drained of all pigment. Swimming closer, Liora smelled a pungent, metallic chemical odor that had no place in this pristine ocean. She shined her flashlight down. A small cylindrical device the size of a forearm, encased in gray metal and camouflaged with fake moss, was leaking a thick blue liquid into the water. All around it, small fish floated belly up, and the seaweed was shriveled. The ecosystem was dying. The affected area wasn't large yet, but Liora instantly understood. If left unchecked, the ocean currents would spread this toxin across the entire reef within weeks. She pulled out her waterproof camera to document the evidence. As she was taking the fifth photo, she heard a heavy thud echoing through the water, a dull, heavy sound like flesh and bone striking rock. This was followed by frantic thrashing. Air bubbles shot everywhere, and the water violently churned about 30 meters away. Liora spun around, her eyes scanning rapidly, and then she saw him. A figure large, very large, was sinking amidst the white bubbles. He was wearing a black wetsuit, no oxygen tank, just a freediving snorkel. It was shallow water gear for an amateur thrill seeker. He was thrashing aimlessly, his arms flailing, his head tossing back and forth, disoriented, likely a head injury from hitting the rocks. Her rescue instincts, drilled into her by her father since she was 12, kicked in instantly. Liora didn't think twice. She kicked her fins hard and shot toward the sinking figure. The distance closed rapidly. He had stopped thrashing. His body was going limp, arms dangling, head tilted to the side. Unconscious. A thin trail of blood leaked from his right temple, mixing with the seawater into a pale pink ribbon. She reached him. She hooked her arms under his armpits and was nearly dragged down with him. He's heavy. He was at least 6'2", with broad shoulders and hard, dense muscle beneath the neoprene. Not gym muscle, but the kind built by intense labor and battling the elements. Liora tightened her grip, kicking her fins relentlessly, hauling them both toward the surface. Their heads broke the water. She kept his face elevated, looking around for a lifeline, and spotted a yacht anchored about 50 meters away. It had a sleek white hull, a sharp bow cutting through the waves, and dark teakwood decks. On the starboard side, elegant gold lettering spelled out, Carboni. In this desolate stretch of sea where fishermen struggled year-round with storms and debt, a yacht like that meant only one thing. This man belonged to a different world. But right now she just needed to save a life. It didn't matter who he was. She swam, dragging the heavy body toward the yacht. Grabbing the boarding ladder, she guided his head up first, then used every ounce of her strength to haul his massive frame onto the deck. Just as she laid him flat on the teakwood floor, a man rushed out from the cabin. He was tall, heavily built, and dressed in dark clothes. His face looked sharp, intelligent, but currently masked in extreme tension. He dropped to his knees beside the injured man, his eyes quickly scanning from the blood on his temple to his faintly rising chest, and called out his name, his voice restrained but unable to hide the panic. Enzo. No response. The man's eyes remained tightly shut. Dante frowned, his mind rapidly racing through possibilities. He had followed Enzo for 10 years. He knew the boss like the back of his hand. Even though Enzo didn't dive often, his swimming and diving techniques were top tier. He grew up by the sea. His body belonged to the ocean. A simple collision with a reef shouldn't happen to a man like Enzo. Something abnormal had distracted him. Something Dante had almost never witnessed. But that question had to wait. Right now, Enzo needed to live. Dante pulled a first aid kit from the cabin, swiftly wiping the blood around the lacerated temple with sterile gauze, then applying a temporary pressure bandage. His movements were crisp and decisive, the actions of a man who had treated more battlefield wounds than he could count. Liora knelt beside them, her fingers checking his carotid pulse. Weak but steady. She checked his pupils, sluggish light reflex, slightly dilated on the right. She looked up and said, "I need to start CPR right now." Dante looked at her. He saw her steady hands, her calm and piercing gaze, and the fact that she had just single-handedly hauled a 200-pound man onto the boat. 10 years of underworld observation gave him the answer instantly. This girl knew exactly what she was doing. He took a step back, giving her space, and said briefly, decisively, "I trust you. Do it." What startled her most when she touched his skin was the cold, It was unnaturally freezing. Not cold from being submerged in water. She had saved enough people to know the difference. It was a deep internal chill, as if his baseline body temperature was fundamentally lower than a normal human's. His skin was like stone soaked in the night sea, but it wasn't the cold of a dying man. It was an intrinsic cold, a cold that belonged to him. This discovery made Liora act faster, more decisively. She thought he was in critical condition. Hypothermia combined with a head injury was a lethal combination. She did chest compressions, checked his airway, and then, noticing his breathing was far too shallow, she leaned down for mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. The touch of her lips was strong and purposeful. She was saving a life, not kissing him. But the moment her warm lips pressed against his freezing ones, breathing warmth into his lungs, an image flashed through Liora's mind. A split second, blurry, yet terrifyingly vivid. She saw herself, standing at the edge of a cliff, holding hands with a man, looking out at the sea, the wind blowing her hair. A full moon shone brightly above and below. The ocean surface shimmered with a long streak of light stretching from the horizon to the base of the rocks, as if the moon were connecting the sky and the sea with a tether of light. Déjà vu. It was so strong she had to pull back for a second, her eyes widening, her heart racing. It was as if this had already happened, or was going to happen. Noticing her pause, Dante quickly asked, "Is something wrong?" She snapped out of it, pushing the strange image aside, and resumed the CPR. Chest compressions, count, rescue breaths. Compressions, count breaths. The third time. Her hands were strong and precise on his chest, but every time she leaned down to breathe for him, her warm lips touched his freezing skin. The contrast between warm and cold, between her and him, created a bizarre sensation she couldn't name. He choked. Water spilled from his lips. His chest heaved, and his eyes slowly opened. Those eyes were a stormy gray blue, cold and sharp. But in that first split second, before reason took control, Liora caught a glimpse of something buried deep behind them. Confusion, helplessness, and a suffocating dense loneliness. Then he looked at her, looking straight at her, unwavering, and Liora felt a slight jolt in her chest. That face. A strong, chiseled jaw covered in light stubble. Dark brown hair, wet and clinging to his forehead. Classic Mediterranean features mixed with something wild. She knew this face. Not from real life, but from a feeling from somewhere deeper than memory. As if she had seen him in a dream she forgot upon waking. He opened his mouth, his voice hoarse and heavy. "What happened?" Dante quickly explained to put Enzo at ease. "Enzo, this girl saved you. When I ran out, you were already on the deck." Liora added, her voice calm. "You hit your head on the reef. You were unconscious underwater. I pulled you up." The gray-blue eyes blinked slowly, processing the information. Then, faster than expected, he forced himself to sit up, bracing his hand against the deck, wincing as a headache struck. But he didn't groan. He just gritted his teeth, suppressed it, and looked around. His eyes quickly swept the entire deck, the instinct of a man used to assessing his surroundings. He shook his head slightly, frowning as if trying to dig up memories erased by the impact. I think I saw something abnormal underwater," he said slowly, his voice raspy but still holding the commanding authority of a Mafia boss. "I hurried over to check, but something caught my leg. I tripped and hit my head on the rocks. But I can't remember clearly what it was." He stopped, his brow furrowing. Then he slowly turned to look straight at Liora, his gray-blue eyes lingering on her face a little longer than necessary. "Thank you," he said. It wasn't polite, social gratitude. His voice dropped low, so sincere it sounded almost helpless, the kind of gratitude from someone who owed a life debt for the first time and didn't know how to repay it. "You saved my life." Liora smiled, a light, natural smile. "Saving people is something I occasionally do when I dive. Don't mention it." She paused, her eyes glancing at his wound, and added, "You need to rest. You seem to be very cold. You shouldn't stay out on the deck too long." Enzo and his bodyguard exchanged a look. A split second. Very fast. But Liora caught it. The kind of look two people share when a stranger accidentally stumbles upon their secret. She had just pointed out something only the two of them truly understood. Then Enzo signaled his guard with his eyes, a barely perceptible nod. The bodyguard, whose name she would later learn was Dante, stood up and said, "Wait here for a moment." He disappeared into the cabin. When he returned, he held a mug of hot tea in his right hand and a thick envelope in his left. Dante handed the tea to Liora. She took it, thanking him, the warmth from the ceramic seeping into her palms. Then he placed the thick envelope in front of her. Enzo looked at her, his voice calm but serious. "You saved my life. This is my thanks." Liora looked at the envelope. It was thick. It was probably enough to pay 2 months of electricity bills, fix the roof, and buy new diving gear for the whole season. Then she looked back at Enzo. Without embarrassment, without hesitation, she shook her head. "I don't save lives for money. You owe me nothing." Her voice was calm and natural, as if refusing a life-changing sum of money was the most normal thing in the world. Enzo frowned. In his world, every transaction had to be squared away. Saving a life was the ultimate debt. Everyone had a price. But this girl, her brown hair matted with seawater, her bare, unadorned face, her athletic frame in a soaking wet wetsuit, looked at him with straightforward, calculating free eyes. He had never met anyone like her. Liora finished her tea, set the mug down, and stood up. "I have to get back in the water to finish my work." She checked her dive gear. But before jumping in, she turned back to look at Enzo. And for the first time, his cold eyes softened, replaced by a look of sincere pleading. Not begging, but a rare, genuine vulnerability from a powerful man. "Take care of yourself," she said. "That head wound needs to be monitored for the next 24 hours. If you feel dizzy, nauseous, or have blurred vision, go to the hospital immediately." She paused, looking out at the sea, and added, a hint of hesitation in her voice, "And if you go diving next time, you should wear the proper gear. The area you dove in today is undergoing some abnormal changes. Accidents could easily happen." Enzo quickly asked, his eyes turning sharp. "What kind of changes? Can you be more specific?" Liora hesitated. She looked at him, his handsome Mediterranean face, the luxury yacht, the gold-lettered family name on the hull, and a defensive instinct flared up. She didn't know what he wanted the information for. Was he trying to protect the ocean or exploit it? Was he trying to save the ecosystem or cover up evidence? She was just a kelp diver. She wasn't naive enough to believe a wealthy tycoon would care about dead coral. So she backed off. "Everything happened a bit fast, so I'm not entirely sure," she said, her voice calm. But Enzo was sharp enough to realize she was hiding something. "I need to go right now to finish harvesting before noon." Enzo watched her. His gaze was cold but flashed with amazement, as if this were the first time anyone had dared to refuse him an answer. Liora's hesitation didn't make him angry. It made him curious. She refused his money. She refused to give him information. She saved his life and then turned her back, walking away as if he were just some unlucky fisherman. In Enzo Carboni's world, no one treated him like that. Liora stepped up to the edge of the boat. She gave him one last look, a slight nod of farewell, and jumped into the sea. Her dark silhouette faded into the blue water. Enzo sat on the deck, watching the spot until she disappeared completely. Liora swam back to her usual reef and resumed her work. Her heart felt light. Saving a life was always the greatest feeling in the world. This was the first time she had rescued someone whose background was the polar opposite of hers, $1 million yacht versus her old motorcycle, but he had thanked her with a sincerity she rarely received, even from people of her own class. Thinking about the thick envelope she had rejected, it might have been enough to change her entire season, enough to send Maya on a vacation, enough to stop her dad from scowling at the bills. Liora still had no regrets. She was happy with the normalcy of that decision. Money could change a life, but if she took it, it would change who she was. But the strangest thing was the feeling when she touched his lips during CPR. That flashing image, the cliff, the holding hands, the full moon, the streak of light on the sea haunted her. She didn't understand why. There was no logical reason. But the familiar sensation when looking at his waking face, those gray-blue eyes, his features, she knew him. From somewhere. From sometime. And that thought kept rippling through her mind, like small waves wearing away at the shoreline. It wasn't until late afternoon, when she was packing up her gear on shore, that she suddenly remembered. Her hand instinctively reached for her chest, and her heart dropped. The mother-of-pearl pendant was gone. She dug through her bags, her gear, checked every pocket. Nothing. The braided leather cord was old, knotted and reknotted over the years, and it must have snapped while she was struggling to haul his heavy body onto the deck, or it slipped off underwater, or fell somewhere on the teakwood floor of the Carboni yacht, the keepsake her mother made the night she was born. The bright full moon in the dark night sky, 20 years without leaving her neck. She looked out at the ocean. The white yacht had vanished from sight hours ago, and with it, her mother's moon. The Carboni yacht cut through the waves, heading back to base. The engines hummed steadily, the bow slicing the water into 2 long trails of white foam. But Enzo didn't hear a thing. He sat in the cabin, leaning back against the black leather chair, looking out at the sea through the tempered glass, but his mind was entirely somewhere else. On the walnut table in front of him sat a glass of whiskey, untouched. Beside it was the open first aid kit Dante had just used to change the bandage on his temple. The wound throbbed slightly, but to Enzo, a man who had been gnawed at by a freezing chill from the inside out for 10 years, physical pain was trivial. Footsteps. Dante walked in from the deck, holding a small object. He placed it in front of the boss, a small oval pendant made of white mother of pearl, encased in a thin steel rim, attached to a broken braided leather cord. "The girl dropped this on the deck," Dante said. He sat in the chair opposite, looking at Enzo, his eyes a mix of worry and mild reproach, the kind only a loyal 10-year subordinate would dare to show. "You know, I still don't understand why you insisted on jumping in yourself. I offered to go first, to scout and report back, but you wouldn't listen." Enzo was silent for a moment. Then he spoke, his voice deep, slow, choosing his words carefully. "Lately my connection with him is fading." He didn't need to specify who him was. Dante was one of the few who knew the secret of the sea god. "Every time I focus, the messages aren't as clear as before. Blurry. Fragmented. Like the signal is being jammed by something." He looked out at the ocean through the cabin glass. "I suspected something abnormal was happening to the ocean, something interfering with the ecosystem, affecting the very thread that connects me to him. So I had to go down myself, to feel it with my own body. No one else could replace me for that." Dante let out a quiet, suppressed sigh. He didn't object because he knew that when the boss said no one else could, it truly meant no one else could. But his eyes clearly said, "Next time at least let me be in the water with you." "And as a result you almost drowned," Dante said, his voice even but carrying an edge. "If it wasn't for that girl." Enzo looked down at the mother-of-pearl pendant on the table. He picked it up, twirled it between his fingers. It was cheap in terms of material, worn in terms of age, but it had been preserved so carefully it bordered on reverence. The hand-bent steel rim was slightly uneven, showing tool marks. It wasn't machine-made. The shell was polished smooth from years of contact with skin and salt water. Engraved into the shell was an image, a dark night sky surrounding a prominent, glowing full moon, detailed down to the tiny craters, shimmering against the iridescent background. Below the moon were a few thin curved lines, thin clouds, sea mist, or perhaps the horizon. A keepsake. He knew instantly. The kind of thing people wear not for fashion but because they can't bear to take it off. Dante asked, "Why didn't you give it back to her right then?" "Because I wanted to look at it a little longer," Enzo replied. Deep, slow voice. Dante watched his boss. 10 years of following Enzo had taught him to read between the lines, and the unspoken truth here was obvious. He kept the keepsake because it was the perfect excuse to see her again. No need to invent a reason. No need to explain. Just show up, present it, and the story would write itself. Dante didn't say anything, just gave a slight nod, understanding perfectly well but knowing the boss would never admit it. Enzo set the shell pendant down on the table. Then, driven by an inexplicable urge, he pulled the black rhodium chain from his own neck, sliding off his black titanium dog tag, and placed it right next to hers. His father's dog tag. His final keepsake. The front was engraved with an image of a dark, abyssal sea at night, waves rolling beneath a moonless sky, and a long trembling streak of light on the water, its source unseen. That streak of light was inlaid with white gold, the only shining detail on the solid black titanium surface. When handing it to him, his father had said, "The sea gives our family everything, but the sea is also dark. Remember this. There is always light on the water. Just don't forget to look up." For 10 years Enzo had worn it over his heart every second, in battle, diving, sleeping. But he had never understood where that streak of light on the night sea came from. His father never explained. He never asked. Until now. 2 keepsakes lay side by side on the walnut table. Black titanium and white mother of pearl. A night sea and a full moon. Enzo stared and his breath slowed. Both depicted the night sky. But his looked down at the sea. Hers looked up at the moon. And the trembling streak of light on his dark ocean, a mystery for 10 years, now seemed to find its source, the very full moon on her mother-of-pearl pendant, the moonlight shining down on the sea reflecting the moon back up. Two pictures, two people, two worlds, but sharing the exact same night. There was no hard evidence. No data. Just intuition, the kind of intuition Enzo had learned never to ignore in the Mafia world. His gut told him these two objects were connected. And if the objects were connected, so were their owners. He leaned back in his chair, closed his eyes, and Liora's image appeared behind his eyelids. Her appearance. Beautiful, athletic, but not the painted beauty he saw every day in his world. The heavily made-up faces, the surgically enhanced bodies, the calculating smiles, the expensive perfumes masking the stench of ambition. Liora was the exact opposite. A round, unadorned face. Naturally full lips. Phoenix eyes that glinted with sharp intelligence. Eyes that saw right through you, not easily fooled. An athletic, solid frame, broad shoulders, long lean muscles in her arms, toned calves, the beauty of genuine hard work, not a gym. She radiated a pure energy that Enzo, after years surrounded by deceit and calculation, had almost forgotten existed. Perhaps in the Mafia world, she was the only real thing he had encountered in a very long time. But it wasn't just her looks that haunted him. It was her hands. Even unconscious and unable to speak, Enzo had felt it, from the moment she hooked her arms under his, dragging him to the surface, to when she compressed his chest, breathed for him, compressed, breathed. Powerful. Decisive. The hands of someone who had saved many lives and knew exactly what they were doing. But those same hands were incredibly soft and fiercely warm against his freezing skin. The contrast, fierce yet tender, haunted him. And that moment of CPR, the passionate press of her lips, her warmth flooding his freezing body, like pouring boiling water into a frozen glass, he couldn't forget it. For the first time in 10 years, someone had literally breathed warmth into him. She saved his life. Anyone skilled enough could do that. But what kept replaying in his mind was what happened after he woke up. She didn't take the money. She didn't demand repayment. She wasn't calculating. She saved a Mafia boss's life, turned her back, and jumped right back into the ocean to go to work, as if he were just some unlucky fisherman battered by the waves. In Enzo's transactional world, where every favor had a price tag, every act of kindness came with an invoice, this was almost absurd. She loved the sea just like him. She offered a clue about the anomaly at the bottom of the ocean, the very thing he was investigating, but then hid the rest because she didn't trust him. She dared to reject his money, dared to refuse him answers, dared to treat Enzo Carboni like a normal person. And then, before leaving, she dropped a feather-light remark that weighed like lead. "You seem to be very cold." She noticed I was different, Enzo whispered, his eyes still closed, his fingers unconsciously twirling her pendant. And that not only earned his deep respect, it made him cautious. And if Enzo were truly honest with himself, it sparked something he thought his 10 years of coldness had killed long ago. Genuine curiosity about another human being. 10 years ago, Enzo was 26. That afternoon, he sat on the cliffs overlooking the Olympic Peninsula, the rocky outcropping jutting into the ocean where his father used to take him as a boy. They would sit there, fishing and talking about the waves, the wind, and how the sea had sustained the Carboni family for 3 generations. But today the cliff was empty. It was just Enzo, the black titanium dog tag in his hand, and his bloodshot, swollen eyes. His father had just died. Suddenly, without warning. The night before, he had sat at the head of the table commanding a family meeting. The next morning, his heart stopped. The doctors said it was a massive heart attack. But Enzo didn't believe it. His father was only 62, healthy, sharp, the man who had navigated the Carboni Empire through 3 turf wars, the man who always said, "The sea gives us everything, but if we betray it, it takes back 100-fold, couldn't just die from a mundane heart attack." Enzo slammed his fist into the water, shouting his resentment into the ocean, his voice cracking, hoarse, mixing with salt and tears. "Why? Why did you take my father? He was a good man. He protected this ocean his whole life. Cleaning up trash, preserving the ecosystem, giving back to the sea more than he ever took. Why do good people have to die so young?" Silence. Waves crashed against the rocks. Seagulls cried in the distance. And then, the surface of the sea trembled. It wasn't a normal wave. The water flattened as if the ocean were holding its breath, and then a light flared up from beneath, a soft but intense blue light, as if a switch had been flipped on the ocean floor. Enzo took a half step back, his combat instincts kicking in, but his legs refused to run. Something held him there. Not fear, but a deep primal curiosity, the kind a child feels seeing the ocean for the first time. And the deity of the sea appeared. Not a monster, not a mythological creature with scales and fins, but a hazy, majestic figure formed from light and water, an ancient face shaped by shimmering ripples, eyes as deep as oceanic trenches, a body that dissolved and reformed with the rhythm of the tide. The voice didn't echo through his ears. It materialized directly in his mind, resonant and grand, like waves crashing into an underwater cave. Your father fulfilled his purpose. He did not die too young. He lived enough to protect these waters, enough to raise you into a worthy successor, and enough to return the gratitude that 3 generations of Carbonis have built. Now it is your turn. Enzo stood there, tears still falling, but his mouth wouldn't open. He wanted to scream, "I'm not ready. I'm not good enough. I need my dad." But the deity continued, its voice as decisive as the tide hitting the shore. The sea grants you the ability to see ahead, to see the plots of your enemies before they act, to see the storm before it strikes, to see the opportunity before it arises. But you will pay for it with your own body's warmth. Every time you use it, your temperature will drop a fraction. Whether this is a gift or a curse depends entirely on you. The deity vanished. The blue light extinguished. The surface of the sea returned to normal, as if nothing had happened. But inside his body, Enzo felt it clearly. Energy was being siphoned out. Not all at once, but slowly, like someone turning down the flame on a heater. His body temperature dropped. Not by much, maybe a degree or 2, but enough to feel it. His hands were colder. His skin was colder. His breath was thinner. The cold didn't hurt. It was just there, silent, patient, like the darkness waiting at the bottom of the ocean. From then on, whenever Enzo focused his energy and touched the water, the sea god appeared, bringing prophecies. A rival family's ambush. A compromised shipping route. Exactly which port a hurricane would hit, down to the day and hour. Enzo used this power to conquer territories, crush rivals, and build an unbeatable empire. The Northwest underworld called him the seer, half out of fear, half out of reverence, because no one understood why Carboni was always one step ahead. But every time he used it, his body grew colder. His hands were always freezing. His gaze was always icy. No one dared to hold his hand, because the cold was uncomfortable. No one got close because his coldness wasn't just physical. It seeped into how he looked, how he spoke, how he existed. Enzo Carboni, 36, undefeated, possessing absolute power, yet as lonely as a solitary cliff in the middle of the ocean. And he often wondered, on nights lying alone on his yacht in the middle of the sea, when will the day come that the cold swallows me entirely? A knock on the door pulled him back to the present. Dante walked in holding a thick file folder. File on Liora Vance. As detailed as possible. Does the boss want to read it now? Enzo opened his eyes and sat up immediately. Leave it on the table, Dante. Enzo opened the file. He read every line, slowly, carefully, missing no details. It was exactly how he read an enemy's dossier before a war. Searching for strengths, weaknesses, loopholes. But this time, he wasn't looking for loopholes. He was looking for her story. Liora Vance, 34 years old. Kelp diver on the Olympic Peninsula. Mother, Helen Vance, died 14 years ago. Exhaustion. Her whole life she dove to make a living and raise 2 daughters. Her body slowly deteriorated through every kelp season, every rough wave. Passed away when Liora was 20. The file stated briefly, chronic exhaustion, heart failure. But Enzo read between the dry words, a mother who burned herself out for her children, for the sea, keeping nothing for herself. And Liora, the eldest daughter, had to stand up at 20 and carry the entire family on her shoulders. Father, Arthur Vance, former rescue diver, retired 3 years ago. 50 years old, his body still tough from years at sea, but age and an old back injury forced him to stop deep diving. Transitioned to repairing nets and doing maintenance on small fishing boats. Unstable income. Hot-tempered. Domineering. Deeply traumatized by his wife's death, he vehemently opposed Liora's diving career. He forbade it, yelled, and sometimes practically begged his daughter to quit. But Liora wouldn't listen. The sea was her life's purpose, and she was as stubborn as the tide, crashing against the shore again and again, never stopping. The two clashed constantly. Arthur loved his daughter the only way he knew how, controlling and protecting her through prohibition. Liora loved her father the only way she knew how, defying his bans to make money to feed him. Younger sister, Maya Vance, petite, gentle, inheriting their mother's fragile beauty. So sweet she was easily taken advantage of. Worked at a small seafood joint near the harbor, modest but stable income. Maya was Liora's only emotional anchor, the peacemaker between father and sister whenever they fought. The two sisters protected each other after their mother died. Liora was the shield, Maya was the safe harbor. But Maya had a weakness. She was overly naive. She constantly got entangled in toxic relationships. Bad boys who used her, lied to her, mentally abused her. Every time Maya found a new boyfriend, Liora had to step in and clean up the wreckage, comforting her crying sister, kicking out the trashy boyfriend, patching up torn trust. This made Liora increasingly hardened, not by nature, but because circumstances forced her to be the iron shield for her entire family. She didn't have the right to be weak. She had no one to shield her. And the burden wasn't just emotional. Enzo flipped to the financial page, and the numbers made him understand exactly why this girl was so tough. Liora was the primary breadwinner. The money from the kelp was just enough to eat, pay bills, and save a tiny bit, but there was no surplus. Her dive gear was ancient and needed replacing years ago, but there was no money for it. Yet, in every record, in every testimony from the local fishermen, there wasn't a single line suggesting Liora ever complained. She was content with a life tied to the sea. It was almost absurdly pure, likely because her love for the ocean was so vast it eclipsed all her hardships. Enzo closed the file, set it on the table. He frowned, not in annoyance, but the kind of frown from a man who has just read a story that unsettled his soul. Inside him, a fierce urge rose, a feeling that his 10 years of coldness had seemingly buried for good. This girl deserves more than what she has. She saved his life and asked for nothing. She carried her family without a single complaint. She lived a life of deprivation in the vast ocean. Yet she still smiled, still loved the sea, still rejected a thick envelope of cash from a mafia boss, as if it were the most trivial thing in the world. And he, the man who owed her his life, hadn't even properly thanked her yet. He picked up the mother-of-pearl pendant, twirling it between his fingers. The moon against the night sky shimmered under the cabin lights. She must be anxiously looking for this, Enzo murmured, his voice deep. He looked up at Dante, his eyes sharpening. Do you believe Liora knows a lot more about the anomaly in the sea than she skillfully let on? Dante crossed his arms, leaning against the cabin doorframe, nodding slowly. I thought the cause of your accident was suspicious from the start. You're a strong swimmer. You don't just trip on a rock out of carelessness. Something underwater broke your focus. And that girl, she's been diving in these waters for 12 years. She knows every rock crevice, every current. She understands the anomaly far better than we think. He paused, choosing his words. She just doesn't trust us. Maybe she thinks we want to use the info to exploit the sea. So she hid it. Silence. Enzo looked at the two keepsakes side by side. Black titanium and white mother of pearl. The night sea and the full moon. Then he spoke, his voice ringing with authority, the kind of tone Dante had heard for 10 years, meaning, no further discussion, just make it happen. Set up a meeting with her. Tomorrow morning. Dante nodded. He didn't ask why. 10 years following the boss had taught him. When Enzo Carboni used that voice, no further explanation was needed. He turned and walked out. The cabin door clicked shut. The sound of waves rhythmically lapped against the hull. Enzo sat alone. His left hand held the black titanium tag, the night sea, the sourceless light. His right hand held the white shell pendant, the full moon, the dark sky. He brought the two objects close together, not touching, just an inch apart. In the dim yellow light of the cabin, the white gold light on the titanium gleamed, reflecting onto the mother of pearl, as if reaching for the moon. He didn't know what this meant. Not yet. But he knew, with his Carboni intuition, the instinct of a man who had survived a decade in the dark, that their encounter this morning wasn't a coincidence. The sea never does anything by coincidence.